Hey everybody, welcome to the real United States and welcome to Laurel, Maryland. We're here in front of the Laurel station, which today lays on the Camden line between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore for the MARC train, which is a commuter train that services the greater Baltimore area. However, this train station was built in 1884. It's the work of architect E. Francis Baldwin, who also designed and built a almost identical station in Gaithersburg, Maryland, not too terribly many miles from here. And this was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1973. This is a Queen Anne style railroad station, and I just love these because they've been preserved for well over 100 years and are still in service as they're originally intended. Now, the reason this actually sits here, this was built for the Baltimore and Ohio, the B&O Railroad, in 1884, as being roughly the halfway point between downtown Washington, D.C. and downtown Baltimore, Maryland. So this was a waypoint for people who didn't, in those days were traveling by horse or horse and buggy, and could come, not you have to travel like the entire half of the way, which is a long ride. This would be a waypoint, so it split it up. So the most you'd have to travel to get on the train was a quarter of that distance between those two cities. Been very nicely preserved. In the early 1990s, there was a fire that gutted the building, but it's been all refurbished and restored into its original glory. And as you can see, the name placard's still there that says Laurel. Now, this is, we're filming on a Saturday, and the Camden line doesn't run on the weekends. So we can't get inside and show you, but there's still a waiting room inside. People can go in while they're waiting for the commuter trains here. And there's places to sit and like that, and get in out of the weather. Really nice, of course, when it's raining, or in the winter when it's very, very cold up here. So you can see, which is typical of the Queen Anne style of this building, any number of different what we would call gingerbread, little filigree pieces on the gable ends. Here the scale work, and this other in the middle, which also has a name but escapes me right now, and the intricate brickwork. So it's really nice that we're preserving these pieces of our history, but not just to preserve them as museums, but to actually still be using them. Now, obviously, things are very different today than they were back in 1884 and the ensuing years after that. The MARC train, Camden line, obviously has many, many more stops for commuters now than the original B&O line, but they don't have this same kind of charm of utilizing the original rail station. Now they're little glass in windbreaks, basically, that you can stand in to stay out of the weather. So if you are riding the commuter rail and you can get to one of these, it's charming. Kind of starts off your day, something a little more beautiful, maybe, a little more peaceful. Look how tall those windows are. I don't know if you can really tell there, but those windows are probably about 6 or 7 foot tall, and very different from the sort of styling we use in buildings today, I suppose. Now, the rail line that you see here behind me, you see there's 2 tracks, a northbound and a southbound, is not exclusively the MARC train rail. This rail is shared also by CXS, which was originally the Chesapeake and Ohio system. Before that, Baltimore and Ohio. This is freight rail. So this rail bed, obviously designed for very heavy loads, because the freight rail runs through here on a regular basis several times a day also. You can see they've rebuilt the decking here a few years ago. Did a very nice job of that. Some of this on this side where I'm standing is a composite decking. It's plastic and wood fibers that are made into composite decking, and all the beautiful railings, of course, which are, they're a requirement. They're a building code requirement to have railings around places like this. But I think they've taken a little extra care to make these seem very much like the period, even though there probably wouldn't have been railings, or if there were at the time, they were probably wooden railings. You see we're at quite an elevation. For those of you who care, there are 392 parking places in a large parking lot here too. So obviously they're going to serve a whole big bunch of people, because all of these stations along the MARC line, or I don't know about all of them, but many of them have large parking facilities, so people can drive a short distance from their home to there and then ride the commuter rail the rest of the way, either into DC or into Baltimore. Now, as I mentioned, this is on the National Register of Historic Places, and throughout the United States, a lot of everyone, I hate to use absolutes, but every historic landmark like that will have a large cast metal placard here by it, describing a little bit about it. Often they're cast iron, especially the ones that are put in by federal agencies like the National Park Service. This one happens to be cast aluminum, so that's a little different. But as you can see here on this sign, it says that the fellow that designed this, Baldwin, also designed the rear wing of the State House. Now, that's the Maryland State House in Annapolis. That's, of course, where the state legislature meets and conducts its business. So the fellow is a very prominent architect in the latter part of the 19th century. But I just thought I'd stop and show you this placard, because you're going to see these at almost every one of these historic places you ever go to or you watch us go to. You're going to find a large cast metal plaque explaining about it. So look for them when you're traveling. Now, sometimes these historical placards are not set exactly by whatever it is they're talking about, because the thing doesn't exist anymore, but it's near the location of them. So right across the street, right behind the Laurel rail station, which you can see in the background behind me, is this marker about the first telegraph ever sent between Washington, the capital, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. And those wires that carried that were along the rail bed. Now, there are still some examples of this in America, but they were very, very common when Bev and I were young folks, to see these old disused telegraph wires on these glass or blue glass, the really old ones, insulators that were strung on like miniature telephone poles. Then they always ran along the rail beds. Well, it's because that area had been cleared so people could lay railroad tracks, and it was easy to go ahead and run those wires along the edge of the rail bed without having to traipse through, forest or whatever. You had a nice clear opening. And because that rail bed was probably going in the reasonably shortest or easiest route between major metropolitan areas. So, and I didn't realize this, that the first telegraphic message said, "What hath God wrought?" But apparently it did. And those wires, which are now, like I say, long since gone, but they did run right here along the rail bed that you see in the background. So I just thought I would go ahead and mention that, because this is right here by the rail station. And you do occasionally see this historic marker, what looks to be in the middle of nowhere or not by near anything historical. But the place is historical. The object that made it of interest, long since gone. Anyway, Samuel Morse's, because it's not Morris, it's Morse, so it's hard to say the possessive of that. Telegraph ran right along here when it was first invented. So I'd like to thank you for joining us here on the Real United States in Laurel, Maryland, at the MARC train rail stop, originally the B&O stop, here between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. If you got questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. I love hearing from everybody. I try to get back to everybody I can. If you want, just stop and say hi. I love hearing from you. So please leave us a comment. If you're new here, hey, pick subscribe. Come along for the adventure, because we got lots more to show you. And as always, well, thank you for watching.